Hi, I'm Rajiv, and today we're going back to basics. I'm going to show you how to iron a dress shirt. This is one of my favorite books, The Forgotten Arts and Crafts, and it has everything in here from basket making to soap making. And there's a section in here on ironing with beautiful engravings of old irons. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with irons. If I saw an iron in a storybook like Mrs. Tiggy Winkle, Beatrix Potter book, and she had an iron, I would make my mom stop on that page so that I could stare at the iron. I have no idea where this came from. Maybe a past life. I think that there's something about ironing that's actually therapeutic. You have your iron, you have your clothes are wrinkly, you stand here and you do this, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, it's quiet time. It's quiet time alone with yourself. You can play music, you can have someone sitting there with you. If you have kids, your kids can sit there with you, and you talk to them. If you're alone, talk to yourself. How often do we do something where we're not distracted by anyone else or any device, and we're just doing something and we're sifting through our thoughts in our head? I think that that is a key component to good mental health. Spending alone time with yourself that's longer than 5 minutes, longer than 10 minutes, that's maybe an hour. And that is what is happening when I'm ironing. So, today I am going to show you how to properly iron a dress shirt. The way to do this is ironing it when it's still damp. You wash your dress shirt, don't put it in the dryer, just put it on a hanger, hang it up, and before it's completely dry, when it's still slightly damp, that's when you want to iron it, because the iron pressing out that water is kind of steaming it, and it's steaming all the fibers flat and getting out the wrinkles. So here's the dress shirt that I've washed. Washing your whites, washing them properly. Check out that video, please. This has been washed with bluing, which is why it's so bright white. I've had this shirt for ages, and I'm able to keep it white because I know how to wash whites. So, there is a sequence to ironing a dress shirt. You start with certain things and you end with other things. With a dress shirt, you always start with the sleeve. At least this is how I do it, or this is how I was taught. You start with the sleeve and you start with the back of the sleeve. This is the very first part that you iron, and you start with the cuff. Now, when I'm laying out the sleeve, I'm being very conscious of where the seam is. I make sure that the seam is facing up on the back. So I don't want the seam tucked to the front of the sleeve. I want the seam on the back of the sleeve, right? That's the first step. Lay out, and when you're ironing, it's very important to lay the piece out flat before you start pressing. Because if you just take your iron and start pressing willy-nilly, you're gonna add creases to it if something is folded. So you wanna preface the ironing by laying out the sleeve flat, making sure that it's not creased anywhere, and then starting to iron. So we start with the cuff, open up the cuff, do the inside of the cuff, and really give it a good press. And if you have a steam iron, you can use steam throughout this whole process. You want the iron to be on the setting that's appropriate for the fabric. This is a cotton shirt, so I have it set on cotton. Sometimes when it's really thick cotton, I set it to linen, which is a little hotter than the cotton setting. Now, that inside of the cuff has been pressed. I press the outside a little too, and then we're ready to iron the back of the sleeve. So I start at the bottom and press to the top. And what will happen when you start at the bottom and you press to the top is that the top will have a nice, straight, neat crease. And when you're wearing your dress shirt, I think that seeing that neat crease is something that is very attractive. Nerd. Okay, so the back of the sleeve has been ironed flat. Now we turn this over and we iron the front of the sleeve. You might think, wait, why do I need to iron the front of the sleeve? I just pressed it. Didn't the iron go through? Yes, slightly, but not completely. So you do want to iron the front. Now, if the shirt is starting to dry and you want to really press it so that it's crisp, you can just have a spray bottle handy and lightly spray every now and then. Spray evenly so that it's not soaking wet, so that it's just damp. So we iron the front and we iron the cuff. Sleeve, done. Now we do the same to the other side. Sleeves, done. So the next part of the shirt we iron is the back. There is a sequence to this, I believe, because as you iron certain parts, they maintain their crispness as you're moving the shirt around. I think that's why this is done in this sequence. So on the backs of most shirts, there are two parts. There's the main back, and then there's a part right over your shoulders called the yoke. So we iron those separately. You have to iron the flat part of the back first, and then you iron the yoke afterwards. Lay the back out over the ironing board. The ironing board is designed in a way to really make this job a lot easier and more efficient. There's a curve at the top of the board, so you can use it to get into places like the shoulder and the sleeve. So I'm really using this ironing board properly. Like I'm laying the shirt out as it should be laid out over the board. So I've laid this out so that the sleeve is going over the curve of the top of the board and the point is pointing towards the yoke. And you can see that half the back is what's exposed. Ironing boards aren't wide enough to accommodate the full back of a shirt, so you iron it in two parts. You iron one half and then you move it over and you iron the other half. So this is nicely laid out. There's usually a little pleat at the top of the back. You want to keep that pleat flat. This pleat, you go underneath it, then you iron the flat part of the back. And then what I do is I ease my way up into the pleat and I press over top of it. You press it flat. And as I said, we're doing one half of the back at a time. Really get right up against that armhole and iron that flat too, right here. And now we move the shirt over to the other side of the back. Look at how nice and neat and crisp that pleat is. Nerd. Okay, and you can see I'm doing the same thing with this. I'm pulling the back so that it's taut over the board. I like to also put a terry cloth towel over my ironing board. It makes the surface a little more absorbent and it really helps to get the shirt nice and crisp. And again, iron right up to the seam. Actually, iron right over the seam. So we get to our pleat, iron underneath it, make our way up the middle, and then over top of the pleat. Back, done. Now, the next step is the yoke. And ironing the yoke is the trickiest part of ironing a shirt because you really need to get the yoke stretched over the board. I will admit something to you. Many times, I don't iron the yoke because I'm wearing my shirts under a jacket and who's gonna see the yoke? So, but I'm gonna show you how to do the yoke. So here's the yoke of the shirt, right here. You want to take this ironing board's point and put it at the top of the sleeve so that the yoke is centered over the ironing board. You see that? As I said, any part that you iron, you want to be flat on the board. Again, the yoke we iron in two parts. We iron one side of the yoke stretched over the board, then we turn it, we stretch the other half of the yoke over the board and iron that. Once the yoke is nicely laid out and it's flat, start in the middle of the yoke, right by the collar, and press just the yoke. You can at this stage stretch the yoke so that the front and the back is exposed, and you can iron this part too, the front of the shirt that's connected to the yoke. Just like that. When you move the shirt off of the board, just be conscious that you've ironed a place and try not to wrinkle it again. It's tricky, but once you get used to this, it goes pretty smoothly. Okay, so I'm gonna do the other side of the yoke. Stretch the yoke out so that it's flat over the board, and then iron from the center out. There. Yoke, done. Next, so we have the back, the sleeves, the yoke. Now we do the fronts. And the fronts get laid over the board. The point of the board goes towards the collar. The front fits really beautifully over the board. You can see that the tip of the ironing board fits really nicely into the shoulder seam, and the side of the front is really stretched over the edge of the board. And then you can actually pull the front taut so that it's really laid out nice and flat. Beautiful. Once that's done, give it a nice press. When you're ironing this placket, just be conscious of the little seams, right? Don't iron it this way. Make sure you press the iron over the top firmly to get that placket nice and crisp. Be conscious of the things that are visible. This placket is always visible, so you want that to be really neatly ironed. The pocket as well. Start in the middle of the pocket, work your way out, go right up onto that arm seam and up to the shoulder seam. There, the front's done. We have the other side of the front stretched over the board. Now this is the side with the buttons, so you still want to iron that placket, just go in between the buttons with the tip of the iron. Last part of the shirt that you iron is the collar, and you start with the collar stand, which is the part under the actual collar. This is called the stand. So we iron the back of the stand, and you are ironing the collar as well at the same time. But you start with the stand, and then iron the back of the collar. And this is very important because that collar is the top of the shirt, so you want to make sure that you get it nice and flat. And finally, we do the right side of the collar, and I always wet this slightly just to get it nice and crisp. Start with the stand, iron the inside of the stand, and then do the collar. Make sure there are no creases in there, which is tricky sometimes. There. Now, while this is hot, I always take the collar and fold it over like this and just manually press it. You can take the iron at this point and just do this to press that collar in place so that it's over the collar stand. And while the shirt is still warm, you want to hang it up. So this has been pressed. So once you've ironed your shirt, it's very important that you don't just lay this down somewhere. If you lay it down, creases are going to go back into it. When I iron a shirt, I always finish by hanging it up and allowing it to cool while hanging. So just hang it up like this, and then button the top button, maybe another one, just to close it up and allow it to just sit here and cool down while it's hung. There you have it, how to iron a dress shirt. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thumbs down. But please subscribe for more videos just like this one. Thanks for watching.